Up next in the broadcast, detained U.S. missionary Kenneth Bae may finally get his freedom tomorrow as American human rights envoy Robert King travels to Pyongyang to secure his release. In response to the president's call to normalize the housing sector, new plans are announced today to encourage purchases and stem soaring rent hikes. Western diplomats warn Syria that the ball is in motion for a military attack against the regime in retaliation for Assad's alleged use of chemical weapons. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Wednesday, August 28th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hae.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We start with another step forward in inter-Korean relations. Seoul and Pyongyang have come to an agreement on the specifics of the committee that will manage their jointly run factory zone in the north.
But they have yet to agree on a date for talks on resuming South Korean tours to the Mount Kumgang resort. Hwang Sung-hee has the details.
The two Koreas have finalized their agreement on the formation of a joint committee on the management of the Kaesong industrial complex. An official at Seoul's Unification Ministry said Wednesday that the agreement was reached through the Inter-Korean hotline and added that representatives from the two sides only need to sign the documents now. Once the joint committee is formed, the Koreas will be able to hold meetings on a regular basis and oversee the management of the business park together. Many have said that once the joint committee holds their first meeting, it'll be only a matter of time before operations resume at the Kaesong complex. Seoul has proposed to convene a first meeting next Monday in Kaesong, although the North has not yet responded. Meanwhile, North Korea expressed regrets over the South's counter-proposal to hold talks on resuming Mount Kumgang tours at a later date than it had initially proposed and requested that Seoul rethink the matter. On Tuesday, South Korea offered to meet on October 2nd, a counter-proposal to the North's offer to hold the talks at the end of this month or at the beginning of September. However, Seoul explained that it is important to first focus on the normalization of their jointly run Kaesong industrial complex and to prepare for a successful round of family reunions, which are scheduled to take place at the end of next month. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
While preparations for next month's inter-Korean family reunions are in full swing, it's a waiting game for tens of thousands of families who have registered to take part in the event. By next month, only the final list of 100 people from the South will get the chance to see their loved ones again. Kanya Lee met some of the families.
Fathers separated from their wives and children. Brothers and sisters split from one another more than 60 years ago.
We're looking for our older brother, Kim Nam-guk. He was taken away during the war by the North Korean military at the age of 19.
It's a harsh reality for families who were separated by the Korean War.
As I've gotten older and since my children have grown and left, I now have this longing to see my own family. I don't know if they'll be found, but it's worth a try.
But unfortunately, most of these people here at Korea's Red Cross will not be selected to reunite with their loved ones come September. There are currently about 72,000 registered separated family members in South Korea, but only a fraction, just 100 of them, will be selected to reunite with their loved ones on September 25th through the 30th at Mount Kumgang in North Korea. The first round of cuts was made through a computer process that filtered out the younger candidates and gave priority to those who were either looking for a child or a spouse. Come Thursday, another cut. The list will be whittled down to about 200 after various health exams of the candidates to make sure they are well enough to travel to Mount Kumgang. Once that happens, South Korea's Red Cross will exchange its list with North Korea to confirm whether the family members they're looking for are indeed alive. Then, the final list of 100.
It usually takes us 50 days to get ready for the reunions, but we will get everything together in a month. We are speeding up the preparation process this year.
But time is running out for many of these separated family members. Data show that out of those who are still living, 80%, or about 60,000 of them, are over the age of 70.
I just hope to see them before I die. When I see my siblings, what could I possibly say? I'll probably just hold them, hug them, before saying goodbye again.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And here's the latest on the fate of Korean-American tour operator Kenneth Bae, detained in North Korea. A U.S. envoy is set to travel to the isolated country on Friday to negotiate the release of Bae, who was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor. Han Da-eun reports.
The U.S. State Department and the White House say Special Envoy for North Korean human rights issues Robert King will travel to Pyongyang on Friday to free Kenneth Bae, who has been detained in the reclusive state since November last year. During the visit, Bae is likely to be released from prison and brought back home with Ambassador King the next day. The missionary and tourism operator had been accused of participating in activities designed to overthrow the North Korean leadership by infiltrating at least 250 students into the country. North Korea has reportedly invited top U.S. officials to visit Pyongyang regarding the issue through the New York Channel, a diplomatic line set up between Washington and Pyongyang. During a humanitarian trip to Asia this week, King said the U.S. had continuously requested for Bae's release.
We've requested the North release Mr. Bae on humanitarian grounds. His health is suffering, and we've requested that he be released. We hope that they will listen to our request.
Although the U.S. envoy's talks with his North Korean counterparts will likely be limited to the issue of Kenneth Bae, experts say King's visit may help in easing the standoff between Washington and Pyongyang. This is the first visit to Pyongyang by a top U.S. official since young leader Kim Jong-un succeeded power. In fact, not long after King's last visit to the North in 2011 to free American citizen Eddie Chun, the two countries held high-level talks and discussed North Korea's denuclearization as well as food aid. And as his visit comes amid a series of inter-Korean talks, hopes are high that the elevated tensions on the Korean peninsula may further cool off. Han Da-eun, Arirang News.
With the country reeling from the worst property market slowdown since 2004, the Korean government stepped up and announced a set of measures designed to stabilize the nation's housing market. But will stimulating sales help bring down skyrocketing rents? Our Park Ji-won has more.
The government's new housing plan aims to encourage home buying and to stabilize monthly rent and jeonse prices, which have been soaring in recent years. Jeonse is the unique Korean housing system that requires renters to deposit a lump sum of money that's paid back when lease contracts expire. Jeonse prices have skyrocketed recently to well over 2/3 the value of homes. In an attempt to address the instability in the housing market, Korea's Ministry of Strategy and Finance, together with the Financial Services Commission and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, have come up with the joint measures.
The recent hikes in jeonse prices are attributed to depressed housing sales and structural changes in the Korean housing market from jeonse to monthly rent. Responding to the current problems, the government aims to stabilize rent and jeonse prices through a set of comprehensive financial measures. The government will do its best to protect the nation's lower-income earners.
According to the plan, the government will first reduce the home acquisition tax to 1% of the price of homes that are valued at less than $530,000 and to 3% of the price of homes that are valued at $800,000 or more. Potential home buyers in the lower income bracket will be able to secure mortgages at a cheaper rate in the 1% interest range. Given that current inflation rate stands in the 3% range, this is actually negative interest for home buyers. The government will also work towards supplying about 23,000 public rental housing units during the latter half of this year and offer more tax benefits for monthly renters to lessen the financial burden on people switching from jeonse to monthly rent systems. The measures come 9 days after President Park Geun-hye asked related ministries to come up with ways to stabilize the nation's housing market. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
At the nation's top office, President Park Geun-hye called on Korea's top companies to increase their investments as a means to prop up the sluggish economy. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju reports on the president's power lunch.
President Park emphasized that now is the time for companies to make active and leading investments. During a luncheon with the leaders of Korea's 10 largest conglomerates on Wednesday, President Park said that bold investments made during times of economic hardship were what boosted the sluggish economy and increased the competitiveness of Korean companies. This was the first time since taking office that President Park had met separately with the country's top business leaders, including Samsung Electronics Chairman Lee Gun-hee and Hyundai Motor Group Chairman Chung Mong-gu. She asked the leaders to work towards job creation, saying that jobs can only be created when companies have the determination to do so, not the government. The president also addressed concerns about her campaign pledge for economic democratization, which aims to create a fairer business environment so that small and medium-sized companies can work alongside large enterprises. She promised to make sure that economic democratization policies will not be distorted into something that choke conglomerates by way of excessive regulations. In particular, President Park hinted at easing some of the more controversial regulations in a revised bill of the Commercial Act, which focuses on corporate governance reforms. The president says she would carefully go over the revisions, including one that would limit the voting power of the largest shareholders to 3% when selecting a member of the audit committee. In response, the chairman of the Federation of Korean Industries, Ho Chang-soo, asked the president to listen to what the companies have to say so that they can do their best to reach their investment and employment goals for this year. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
The Korean government faced the fury of the middle class earlier this month when it introduced a tax code proposal that was intended to squeeze more tax revenue out of regular income earners.
It spurred a debate over who exactly falls into the nation's middle class and the fact that there seems to be fewer who qualify these days. For more on the downward trend and what this means for the nation's economy, we are joined live by our Yoo Ji-hae in the studio. Now, Ji-hae, let's start by clarifying the definition of middle class and who exactly are you referring to here?
Well, the OECD defines the nation's middle class as those whose income stands between 50% and 150% of a country's median income. Here in Korea, that would apply to people with incomes between around $16,000 and $50,000 US a year. But to many in Korea, the perception is that you're in the middle class if you have a house without any mortgages, earn enough money to feed and clothe yourself and your family, educate your kids, and still have a little something left over to sock away. It's a point of reference in a country where there is a stark difference between the reality and the perception of who belongs in the middle class bracket. In a survey conducted by the Hyundai Research Institute on around 1,000 people, more than half of those who fell in the OECD's middle class bracket considered themselves to be in a lower income group. The respondents of the survey said they consider the middle class to be households with a monthly income of around $4,500 after taxes have been accounted for, with total assets of around $700,000. Those totals are inflated compared to the OECD's definition of the middle class, which states that homes with a monthly income of $3,200 and total assets of around $220,000 qualify.
So who is closer to reality, the OECD average or the respondents of the survey?
Well, the perception is somewhat based on reality, but although income levels do meet the criteria for being in the middle class, they're having to spend more, while the average assets of Korea's middle class rose 13% between 2006 and 2012. Soaring housing prices and educational expenses over that same period forced middle class debt to rise 30%.
The most important factor in why people don't consider themselves to be in the middle class depends on a household's income and how much they're spending. Households with more expenditures compared to income will not think of themselves as being middle class.
Rachia, so we hear the number of middle class is shrinking. But tell us by how much and what seems to be the reason behind the drop?
Well, a large number of people have fallen out of the middle class since 1997 when the Asian financial crisis hit the nation. The ratio of the middle class defined by the OECD dropped to 67% in 2011, down more than 6 percentage points from 1997. Since then, the gap between the nation's rich and the poor continued to widen, making it difficult for low-income households to rise into the middle class. The nation's slumping growth over the past few years has also caused the gap to further widen.
A shrinking middle class means there are either more high-income or more low-income households, which indicates rising uncertainty about the nation's economy and society.
And this shrinking middle class is not just a phenomenon limited to Korea, it's a global trend.
You're right, Sean. The middle class is in decline in other major economies, OECD economies as well. In countries like the U.S., Japan, and France, the middle class ratio dropped last year compared to 2007. And the Samsung Economic Research Institute expects the downward trend to continue due to slow growth in those countries. Japan's middle class, meanwhile, was standardized downward, with many households falling into the lower middle class. Germany, however, was able to maintain a relatively stable ratio of the middle class thanks to government policies that boost permanent jobs and focus on vocational training.
Then what should Korea do to build up the middle class?
Well, experts say that the government should also boost the economy to create more quality jobs and improve educational and housing policies in order to lessen the burden of the expenditure for the households.
All right. Well, good things to keep in mind. Thank you so much, Ji-hae.
You're welcome.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise.
Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Came on the news. We're trying to cover up the South's true intentions.
Well, a team of UN inspectors resumed their investigation on the Syrian government's alleged use of chemical weapons on its own civilians. Military action by Western powers against the troubled nation may be imminent.
The U.S. says it is ready to strike at any given moment, but denies its intention is to topple the current Assad regime. Kim Han-bin has this report.
The United States and its allies have told rebel forces in Syria that military action against the Syrian government could be conducted within days. Diplomats from the U.S. and other Western countries warned Syrian opposition leaders at a meeting in Istanbul that military action was about to start and told them to be ready for talks if the government wants to negotiate with them. The U.S. says its forces in the region are ready to strike at any moment and are just waiting for President Obama to give it the go-ahead. The Obama administration insists it is still considering various options and is not trying to force regime change in Damascus.
The options that we are considering are not about regime change. They are about responding to a clear violation of an international standard that prohibits the use of chemical weapons.
British Prime Minister David Cameron says Britain wants to punish the Assad regime for using chemical weapons, but he's keen to avoid getting sucked into a wider conflict. Meanwhile, the Arab League has blamed Assad for last week's chemical attack and urged the UN Security Council to act. Experts say the announcement could potentially give diplomatic cover to Western powers if they choose to attack. Technically, the U.S. could legally launch military action against Syria without UN backing if NATO gives the strike the green light. UN backing for any military action is highly unlikely given that Russia, one of Assad's staunchest allies, has veto power at the Security Council. NATO is scheduled to convene an emergency meeting on Thursday to discuss its stance on the matter. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
The geopolitical uncertainty stemming from the Syrian crisis has shunted oil prices to a 6-month high and sent global markets into a tailspin.
Brent crude futures finished at slightly over $114 a barrel on Tuesday, up almost 3.3%. That's the biggest daily percentage gain since early May. Oil prices rose on fears the U.S.-led military action against Syria could destabilize the Middle East, which pumps a third of the world's oil. The heightened risks also caused U.S. and European markets to take a hit, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average dipping 170 points, or 1.1%. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ shed 1.6% and 2.2% respectively.
The South Korean football star Park Ji-sung is set to lead PSV Eindhoven for their Championship League match against AC Milan on Thursday.
And Stephen Che joins us from the Sports Center for a preview. Stephen.
Hey, Park and his team are busy preparing to face the Italian squad in the second and final leg of their Champions League playoff match at San Siro Stadium in Italy. In the first leg last week, PSV and AC Milan fought to a 1-1 draw in the Netherlands, which means that the Dutch team must score at least one more goal than the opposition to advance. A 0-0 draw would have Milan win on away goals scored. And for some added drama, both manager Philip Koku and Park have history with the Italian side. As PSV teammates back in 2005, they lost against AC Milan in the Champions League semis, so they'll be looking for redemption. On to Major League Baseball, Cincinnati Reds leadoff man Choo Shin-soo has hit his 17th home run of the season, reaching a career milestone as he crossed home plate. The homer was the 100th of his career, and by adding his 101 career stolen bases, it gives him entry into the illustrious 100-100 club. He's one of about 40 active players to join the distinctive group. And this year, he's well on pace to a third 2020 season, which will likely be a key bargaining chip in free agency talks at season's end. Finally, it's time to talk about Wednesday's top KBO matchup. The Lotte Giants and the Kia Tigers faced off in Gwangju. The Giants need traction while the Tigers are just hanging on. Top first, it's Lotte. Sonazub brings one home. Tack on two more, it's 3-0 Giants. They add another in the third. Then it's Kia on the comeback. Bottom fourth, Lee Jong-hwan makes contact. A run comes home. Then Najiwan rounds third. The throw to home, a big collision, and he's out. Giants still up 4-3. Kia ties it up in the fifth. And later, they complete the comeback to win this one with a final score of 5-4. And looking at the scores from around the league, SK defeats Hanwha 4-3, NC stuns Samsung 9-1, and Nexon over LG 4-3. That does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Time to go over to our Kelly Park at the Weather Center for the latest forecast. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Sean and Chie. You know, the last stretch of the summer heat made today another hot one, but it looks like relief is on the way.
That's certainly good to hear. So we'll be seeing a change in the weather pattern tomorrow?
Well, that's right, Jie. We have nationwide showers forecast tomorrow. Definitely good news for those who are suffering from the prolonged hot weather. Now, if you take a closer look at our satellite map, the central region and the Cholla provinces will be receiving a good amount of rain from early in the morning, and then it'll spread towards the Gyeongsang provinces by the afternoon. Now, we're expecting over 120 millimeters of heavy rain in the Cholla provinces, while the central and the Gyeongsang regions will be receiving about 30 to 80 millimeters, and the rest of the country, including the Jeju Island, getting about 10 to 60 millimeters as well. Now, it's really important that we stay prepared, especially those in the low-level areas, because tomorrow's rain may come down pretty hard in a short period of time, along with thunder and lightning. Now, most of the precipitation in the central regions will let up in the afternoon, while the southern provinces will continue into Friday morning. For more details, Seoul's highs will drop down 5 degrees, reaching up to 26 in the afternoon, while Gwangju and Busan will both hit a high of 29. Other regions like Daejeon will make it to 28, and Mount Kumgang will be dropping down to 21. And that's all for this hour. I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
And that's our broadcast on this Wednesday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.